Wendy, when Elena joined, I just kind of, because part of the reason I want to hold these community conversations before I kind of launch any initiatives with the Green Theater Alliance is I want to hear from folks around like what would be helpful or what would you like to see out of the Green Theater Alliance. So it is a little bit more kind of conversation based for these. So I'm just kind of curious, kind of as a director, or just in general, what kind of thoughts you have kind of around the Green Theater Alliance or things that would be helpful that we could generate.
I don't really know, Sadie. I don't know. Like I said, I just kind of was like, oh yeah. I mean, we recycle stuff all the time. I mean, years ago, Beaky and I had this we said, okay, we got a new standard for like all Frank designers have to reuse at least 60% of the stock, and we just made that up. We were just like, because it's like, and we make jokes about how there's 2x4s in our rehearsal space that have a longer resume than a lot of actors, that, so yeah. And, it's like, oh, look at that. That was from Tammy the Shrew. That was in 2005, I mean, just like painting or using stuff. I mean, and that's as much about it's being frugal, and it's also being, having an eye for, there's just something disgusting, like when you look at CTC and when they close a show, and like I don't know if it still is the case, but how about how everything used to go in the dumpster? I mean, these huge amounts of stuff that, again, then we would all show up and we would, pillage it and use it in our own sets, but to find a way to sort of formally recycle stuff, I don't know how you do that, because where do you store the stuff, but and I think trying to use materials and substances that are not toxic or environmentally dangerous, it's just, it's kind of like trying to run the theater. I mean, I'm a hoarder. I mean, I'm just a recycler. It's like, oh, I can't throw that away. There's got to be another use for that. And I wish I'd get over that, because my house is just disgusting. But, but trying to sort of use that same kind of philosophy with Frank. And the problem with us saving stuff is that our rehearsal space now is probably more than half full of, storage of set props, costumes, just because, I mean, I just can't see throwing them away, I mean, if they're usable. So trying to find a way, and I don't know how you have a community resource where you can, share those things and use them again. And, so yeah. I don't know if that fits with what you're thinking about or what, but.
Yeah. I chatted a little bit, with Elena about this a little bit, but I'll just repeat it just a little bit. So Elena, you'll just have to hear me kind of say this again. Wendy, have you seen anything on Facebook around Next Stage Rental and Market?
I may have seen it briefly, but I don't know what it is. No, not enough. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So a few months back, a couple of like scenic and props folk kind of came together. And we're chatting about this like very thing about how like so much stuff goes in the trash and like so much of it could be reused, but part of it is that there just isn't like a central spot for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have formed the group called Next Stage that is going to focus a little bit more kind of on scenery and props specifically, and how to kind of keep things out of the landfill while also creating a circular economy. So having things like, the standard things like flats and, platforms, basic furniture rental. So it can have a little bit more of a central location. We're hoping that we're going to be partnering with the Costume Collective too, so that we can all be in one warehouse together. But as we were talking about it, before it was named Next Stage, while we were talking about Next Stage, I came across the Broadway Green Theater Alliance and the fact that you could start a chapter of the Green Theater Alliance. I was like, well, we need that for Minneapolis, because while next stage might be dealing with like the materiality, like the literal materiality of like, we're going to show up at strike and we're going to try and save as much, we're going to put stuff in a van instead of in a dumpster. I think that the Green Theater Alliance can offer kind of a broader umbrella of initiatives. And Elena and I were just chatting a little bit kind of about what sustainability means also in relation to equity and how do we have work-life balance as well. Because I think the idea of sustainability can be very all-encompassing in a lot of different ways. And something that I think about frequently too, that you touched on a little bit as well, is kind of that idea of like, in theater, you kind of like want to be frugal because like, it's not like we have budgets for days, right?
Right.
And to me, like the difference between like, in some ways, not always, but the difference between like frugal and like making like sustainable and green choices is kind of about intentionality. Like, where does that decision come from?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm kind of interested in, the Green Theater Alliance, of like, how do we talk about sustainability on a couple different levels? Like, not just about the set, but like, how, like, what does it look like to have like work-life balance and things like that, so that the industry itself can actually be a sustaining thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm also curious because you mentioned that you kind of just like came up with the number that like sets need to be like 60% recycled.
Yeah.
I love that impulse. I'm curious, like, how did people react to that when you first kind of rolled that out?
Well, it was fun. Do you know Beaky? Do you know John Beaky?
Mm-mm.
He was Bedlam, theater.
Okay.
And so, and he did a number of sets for Frank and so of course they, he was all into, reusing stuff, and so it became a joke with us, but then it was kind of funny. It's like, well, how much of this set is recycled, Beaky, and when we throw it to people, I mean, it was sort of half joking, but it was also, it's like, because we have so much stuff up in our space. It's like, well, look what's here. And again, because we did for many years and still occasionally do like site specific stuff. When we first went to the Sears building, the Midtown Global Market, and we did a couple shows there just before it became the Midtown Global Market. What we did is we scavenged the whole Sears building, because that building had been empty for 8 years. There was one employee left. He was the caretaker, and he was a total pack rat. It was so funny. He had all this stuff down the basement. And so when we did the sets for the first couple of shows, we wandered through the whole 8 floors of the building, and we'd find things, and we just sort of built the set out of sort of found objects, but stuff that was related to the history of the building, which was super cool, and then like when Beaky did several shows in a row, it's like he knew what stock we had. We'd have this, we'd have that. And so then when a new designer came in, and we'd throw it at him, and it was, it wasn't, we just sort of half jokingly, but they would, investigate it. I mean, if you have a lot of the basic things, if you've got the 2x4s, it's like, why not do that? Again, I'm just, because I come from cheap theater, I come from where you don't have big budgets. And it's like, so the more you can save on stuff, the better. It's never been, Frank has never been a theater where I can sit and think, both in terms of actors or sets. I can't go, oh, that actor needs to be a 5'2" blonde, so it's like, who's there, who comes into audition, and okay, that'd be a great person. And it's more about assembling the materials and then making the play. And I think that also can work for set and costumes and stuff too. Kathy Cole, Costume Collective, she's, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was thinking that kind of thing, we'll probably be donating a lot of our costumes to them, because then the costumes can get used more. We only do 2 shows a year, so most of the people around Frank would not object to some sort of mandate like that, so
yeah, great.
But again, it's foreign to me when I talk to a director, or like at a theater where everything is being built from like new materials. I'm like, why?
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm really like interested and curious about with like directors, particularly being able to like make a strong influence in
Uh-huh.
making like there's a couple different things obviously that green choices influence. Like one can be aesthetic, one is process. But for me as a designer, because I design sets, I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but
Uh-huh.
I can sometimes only work as far as the director will let me
Yeah.
like have that choice. So I know for myself, like one thing I'm trying to do as a designer up front is to be like, I'm trying to make greener choices. Like I
Yeah.
really want to try and do this. And like there's some shows where it's just really hard, right? Like if you're doing hyper realism, like
Yeah. Yeah.
just really hard.
Yeah.
So, that's part of the reason like the Broadway Green Theater Alliance kind of acknowledges, I think, a little bit that it's hard to have like a zero waste theater
Yeah.
production.
Yeah.
Because like zero waste is like a whole different like school of thought of sustainability that I think you can't go like flip the switch and just suddenly be like, I have no trash now, like because we have been like normalized to think a
Right.
certain but I'm just kind of curious, like from Wendy or Elena, kind of your thoughts on kind of the influence a director can have in these choices as well.
I mean, I don't know. I think that like, again, during this period of working with Beaky so much, it was that we would do things like when we did, particularly when we're doing something in a found space or a site specific or found space, but we did a couple things at the machine shop behind the Pillsbury A mill stuff. And I think Bedlam was housed initially or early on in a building, and down below was a place that there was a bicycle repair shop called the Pit. And so I think they were going out of business or something. So there was all these bikes that like were just, so again, this is to Beaky's credit, is that, so he made huge parts of the set out of these old bicycle parts, and it was not something that, I mean, he saw that and saw a way to use that. And then we'd say, well, what if we had like, okay, for this scene, we were doing Mother Courage. It's like, okay, so we need a gate that represents the church or something. So we found, again, discarded outside the building, there was this chunk of wrought iron fence, and then Beaky used these bicycles and he made all these sort of religious sort of things that he welded to the thing, so just using, and he was kind of genius at that, at finding ways to use found objects to make and I mean, I suppose, yeah, you do have to have a director who's, I'm totally game for that. It's like, yeah, oh, that's wild. Where did that come from? And I was just delighted to see something that was so, but I also know a number of directors who were like, well, no, I was seeing it more like this, and just, so, I mean, I think a director can be a huge help with sort of, expanding, allowing, and encouraging that.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, as Wendy's able to make those decisions as the director and as the artistic director of the theater, right? I
Mhm.
think, all of my directing is freelance, and especially in the beginning, if you're, new with a theater company, you're like, how is my idea of recycling, or how is this going to fly when I don't, like one of the theaters I work at, I'm coming back for a fourth show with them. I know that if I were to say, hey, can we talk about how can we cut down on the paper we use at auditions? Or can we, like I know somebody who, I remember seeing an audition notice where they wanted everything submitted. They didn't want people to have to bring in pieces of paper, like a headshot and
Mhm.
resume, right? I think
Mhm.
they got those little kind of things of being able to make those choices as part of your own practice. But I think it's also getting the leaders of institutions to sign on to it,
Mhm.
whether that be whether we're talking about sustainability of actual physical materials or timing. I mean, I've come out of the COVID intermission. I refuse to go back to a 10 out of 12. That's just
Mhm.
my thing. It's like, no, we need more balance, and we can do it in other ways. And I've been able to, so far, my next two productions will not have that. Like we've figured out a schedule to make it more realistic and and reasonable for everybody to have rest time and still get the job done. So I think it's something that has to just be an ongoing conversation. Like, don't make assumptions that you can't do it, so why bring it up?
Mhm.
But also figure out creative ways to still accomplish what everybody wants to accomplish.
Yeah.
There's also a way to sort of pitch it that it's not a thing. It's not a limitation. I mean,
Right.
it can be an expansion of,
Yep.
it's like, and I think that, again, that's something that I feel that I have learned from when I was working with Beaky on that, and, you know,
The other thing I know, like there's a theater that they would love to save everything, they just don't have the space for it.
yeah, that's
And
definitely,
sometimes that's more of a thing of, you know, we just don't have any place to keep this. And then that becomes the question of who covers that cost? Or is that a collective that every theater puts in $50 for the year? I don't know, this is not realistic, but everybody puts in a fee to be able to have storage for things. I mean, I know that when I was still with Prime, um, we needed a sink. It was set in the future, but we needed a sink. And when the show was done, the set designer was like, "Don't you want the sink?" And I was like, "I don't know where I'm going to put that." I mean, it was a big kitchen sink.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Well," and we ended up having to buy storage space, not just for the sink, for other things too. But even a small theater company like Prime Productions, it got to a point where we had enough stuff that we needed a storage. And I can't imagine there isn't a theater out there that doesn't have some stuff that they've retained from productions. But then, like, does anybody else need to use our sink? We could share that sink with others, and figuring out how can those inventories be shared, because that
Mhm.
might also be part of it. Like right now, I'm trying to source a small piano. I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, who do I know in town that has had shows recently that had pianos? Like, where can I find this a piano? It doesn't have to work. I just need a piano.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and
that's one
those kind of,
thing.
but sharing that information so that it's not everything is only able to, what do you have? You have the Guthrie and you have TRP for prop rentals.
Mhm.
Beyond
have you
that, it's
checked,
like
have you
everybody's
checked
got
Parks?
props.
Have you checked Park Square for that, Elena?
No, I should ask them.
I mean, they might have. I mean, I know they have real piano, but they might have a shell too. I don't know. But
It's got to be tiny.
yeah, I don't know. So,
But yeah, that's a good one to remember too. Thank you.
That is one thing at Next Stage that I know that we're interested in trying to get together is kind of developing a rental platform, because I think what you've stated is the part of the problem is that there isn't, like, we've got Twin Cities Theater on a budget, which I think is a great Facebook group for that, but it isn't necessarily, it's like it's a post and then it goes away. So we're hoping to kind of develop a platform that is like a central location so that people who have rental things, it might be over here, but because it's on the website, to contact them. So we're hoping to like close that loop.
yeah.
So that's something that at Next Stage, I know we're definitely interested in. But that idea of space is always something that comes up because, like, any theater I've ever worked at, no matter the size, whether it's the Guthrie or whether it's the Nomadic Theater Company, space always comes up as part of the problem of being able to make more sustainable choices, which is such a strong commonality that kind of comes back in a lot of these conversations. So,
Well, it's just, yeah, because like, what do you do if you don't want to throw something away because it could have another life, but if you don't have especially if you don't have any space of your own at all, I mean,
Mm.
for the first like 10 years of Frank, my garage was full, and then my garage and basement were full, and then we got a rehearsal space, and now that's full of stuff that and there's just stuff in there that we haven't used for years, and and again, if it could be usable to someone else, it would be great to be able to share that, so that is the issue.
mhm, mhm. Elena, you mentioned that two of your upcoming productions aren't doing 10 out of 12s. I'm curious, is that something that you brought up as a director, or is that something that organizationally those theaters were interested in kind of taking on and kind of worked with you?
Um, Both. One was when I sat down with the artistic director, I said I would really like to reevaluate our tech weekend. I mean, it also didn't help that my tech weekend for the show happens to fall over Memorial Day weekend.
Mhm.
But when I mentioned, I mentioned it very cautiously, kind of like, so I'd like to have a conversation, not like this is the way I want it done, but I was like, I'd like to have a conversation about how we could reevaluate the timing around tech weekend, and if we could look at something different than just a 10 out of 12.
Mhm.
And and thinking I'm going to have to like explain the rationale, or I'm going to have to go into more detail. And they were like, "Oh no, we're already working on it." And so the show I'm doing is like the seventh in the season.
Mhm.
They've already started it with the first show of this season, right? So
Okay.
by the time they get to me, they got to schedule my whole production schedule. They were already like, "Yeah, we've already figured this out," and it's just a matter of incorporating a dry tech and a few other things. But um, I think we got it down to a total of 8 hours with a 1 hour break, so it's 7 hours total. Like we'll be out of the theater by 7 o'clock at night, which is pretty great instead of 10 o'clock at night after a
Very
long
much
day.
so.
Um, the other theater, uh, when I brought it up, they said, "Oh no, we've already eliminated 10 out of 12s," and I just hadn't. They just hadn't updated the production schedule to reflect that. So they were like, "No, we've already gotten rid of the 10 out of 12s. We're splitting it up over 2 days." Blah 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 blah. So bringing it up was not as much of a um, hurdle to or a hill to climb as I anticipated it could be. Um, because I can't assume that everybody is following the same people I follow on social media or reading the same articles you know, and plus it came out of a lot of the work that we talked about with creating the safety standards. The 10 out of 12 thing just came up again and again and again and again. And not just from the performer standpoint, but the fact that after the actors leave, designers and tech still need time to fix, paint, hammer, build, whatever. And so it was hearing it from multiple sides. So far, it's been a much easier conversation than I anticipated it to be, which is giving me the courage to make sure I keep asking for it in the future going forward.
Yeah. Well, and I think that at least with like green and sustainable choices, like I think that that's kind of part of it is that I think the change has to come from both directions. I mean, I think that's how most like inherent systematic change kind of has to happen. But this idea of like, there's some like little asks that we can make along the way. Like, can we just like not use paper in auditions? Like that is like a little ask that, can get like a whole system to change. But I think if there's, a whole movement towards like 10 out of 12s and management is okay with it, those are both inherently like both choices are coming from like different impulses, but both are towards the same goal of having more sustainable practices. And I think that's what's really interesting to me when we're talking about sustainability as well, is how so many people are interested. And part of it, I think, is people seeing that they're not the only one who's thinking this way, that like we can be making different choices or making greener choices. Which I think is part of what I'm interested in helping the Green Theater Alliance. People see that there's a community that is interested in making more sustainable theater or looking at theater through that sustainable lens as well. And it's not just like me in my living room after 18 months of a pandemic thinking about things too much.
Well, I
So,
mean, I was involved with a theater company that doesn't exist anymore about 10 years ago, and I remember at the time we were talking about programs, and to save on printing costs, the suggestion was we'll have a l- a- I don't know if QR codes existed back then, but it would be a web link or something, and people could read it on their phone. And I remember at the time poo-pooing it because I was like, not everybody has a smartphone, yada, yada, yada. Fast forward to last month or a few weeks ago, I went to go see Every Brilliant Thing at the Jungle. Um, I think we got a one-page folded in half piece of something but all the bios, all the director's notes, like literally everything else, you photographed a QR code on that piece of paper and everything was on your phone. And I was like, wow, the amount of paper that they're saving, the trees that are being saved, something as little as that, when you think about, you know, programs. I mean, that is a huge, huge resource that's getting used. I thought that was, and it didn't bother me. It worked really well. And I think because smartphones are becoming so ubiquitous that more and more people could possibly buy into it and make it, that quote unquote the tradition of having a program when you walk in the door could possibly be changed. Like there could be a different way to look at it. So even little things like that and get the audience involved could also be an interesting perspective.
I also think that it's a way to help educate audience. Like the program is such a like specific thing because it's such a universal thing that we all physically touch in a theatrical production. And the thing, as you mentioned, programs that I started thinking about is like, I'm usually someone that there's a few programs in my life that I've kept. Like I've kept like my Hamilton programs when I've seen it. And there's a couple other, I'm like looking at them over there on my wall. But there's like very few programs that I actually want to keep. And it's so interesting when we're talking about this like materiality, like it like forces me to like have a choice too of like, what am I going to do about this thing? And when you then put a system in place to say, like, we've already thought about it, we've already taken care of you, then I'm not in a position of trying to figure out, like, well, am I going to keep this program? Am I going to throw it out? Like, what am I going to do with it? Which I just think is an interesting kind of relationship that we as people have to objects and like feeling like we need to like keep them, or like, what does that actually mean when you like keep a program from a show? It's just kind of an interesting thought.
Well, I keep my programs for tax purposes, but that's and as a reference if I want to like, ooh, who was that actor that played that role, and I want to bring them into audition. But yeah, yeah, exactly. What if the decision's made for us, then it'll just force me to go to the Jungle website to find the name, or or something like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Wendy, I'm also curious because as you've kind of described this bicycle gate as an example of kind of found object. I'm not sure if you've read it, but there's the Sustainable Production Toolkit, and they talk about how site-specific theater is sometimes the best way to make sustainable choices because you're not like literally hauling a whole set. You are going to a setting and you're inherently like making a choice. But I'm curious in the instance where you were making like a gate with like these bicycle parts, and as we're also talking about what does it mean to have like work-life balance and have sustainability in that way, is that because I think that part of it is like sometimes art can be like the act of making art can be very like regenerative and restorative in that way that you're creating something. And if there's kind of a balance of like, we made this like beautiful gate and I was like really motivated to make it, so I was okay putting the hours in, versus like I put in a lot of time and I made a thing and now I feel burned out and tired. Like I think there's kind of like a balance to strike there.
I mean, I think there's a whole joy out of like, for me anyway, it's like taking something that's like, oh, look at that pile of junk, and oh, look what it became,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think that's, and again, I'm fascinated as a director. I'm fascinated. I mean, the first show I ever worked on with Kathy Cole, which was in like 1980 something, it was over at Park Square, and we were doing Macbeth, and the sort of the idea that the show was kind of like a Mad Max post-apocalyptic sort of. There was lots of the weapons were like bicycle chains and all kind of, lots of metal stuff, and there was one scene where this and she mixed up the costumes in the way that she does with great like sense of a sense of period, but then mixed up with just like, what the hell is that? And there was this guy was on stage, and he had what looked like, we were sitting in the back of the house and looking, and it looked like he had on an Elizabethan ruff around his neck, but it wasn't quite that. And then I'm looking at it, and again, this is the first time I had worked with her, and now we've worked together for like 30 years. So I'm like, Kathy, is that an air filter around his neck? And that's what it was, that was just something that she had come up with. And again, sort of using this sort of, which just delighted me. I mean, I just, and that's happened, a lot of times with both with her and with other designers, where there's just something where I'm just like, what is that? And they tell me what it is. And I'm just like, it's some everyday object or something that was found in the street or in the, and I mean, I'm delighted by that. To me, it becomes, but again, that's sort of what my background is. I don't come from, I always find it awkward when I'm working in a theater where you can actually say it needs to be this, it needs to look like this, and someone actually has to make that or buy that or thing. The funniest story on that was doing Lysistrata at the Guthrie, like again, 100 years ago in the lab space. And it was an adaptation of Lysistrata that was super naughty. And at one point, there's a scene where one of the women is running out and she pulls a dildo out of her bag and she runs across the street waving it. It's sitting in this production meeting at the Guthrie, with all these sort of staid kind of, and the props guy was the guy who had been there for like 30 years or something. And they're like, okay, Miss Knox, the dildo, do you have any specifications for color? And I just kind of looked at Michael Summers, who was doing the set, and I'm just like, just ready to burst out laughing. I said, I think blue with sparkles, and then they said, and any preference for size? So, and the thing is that they go out and they buy this 15-inch blue sparkly dildo. And I'm just like, that was to me was just kind of the height of what I am not used to, it's just like it, it's just, I was odd when you can, it's like, dude, would we really need to, I mean, like, again, if I was doing that today, would we really need to do that? No. What could you do? You could find any kind of objects to use for whatever it is. So, and I'm just kind of delighted with this. Where do you pull something out of the storage that you've got, or you find something in the building or in the basement? It's like, oh, look, does this work? And to see how, I mean, that becomes sort of the fun of creating theater, because it's really like using objects to make this thing happen, which, there's the magic of that, of transforming something into something else that I think is really rewarding.
I'm going to always use that as my example now of like, how specific can I get when I'm designing something? So I love that story. Thank you. Sometimes as a designer, I always think of it as the director's job to think of how the audience is going to receive choices. And I think as I've started some of these conversations around green theater, one thing that has come up kind of as a common theme is, well, the audience isn't going to accept that. Like, the audience will not be okay with like less of a set. Or I won't, if I'm a green designer, I won't be hired as much because I won't be as desirable. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you two as directors, kind of that responsibility or role you feel towards the audience, potentially when you're making some of these green or sustainable choices that may kind of like impact the production itself.
Well, I guess too that, again, I don't feel that that's a limitation, or doesn't have to be a limitation. You can do things like, again, this is another Sears building example where, we did the first piece that we did in there where we scavenged all the things from the garbage that was left in the building. And then the second show that we did there was based on these Italian fairy tales. And Michael Summers did the set, and it was set in like this Italian villa, which, so he painted the floor and he made a, made a lovely little sort of stage area. But then to bring the audience in, we decided he created this whole little forest where he went out and he followed, the city was out trimming a bunch of trees along 26th or 28th Street. So they went out and they just picked up a bunch of these big branches and then mounted them. And then we put little sparkle lights in there. So the audience walked into this thing that was like this magic fairyland. That was their entranceway into the space, I feel like if you're creating a vital enough theater experience, and if you're using what you have in an imaginative way, I don't feel that the audience, again, the audience that I'm used to doesn't feel shortchanged by it wasn't real silk, and I've heard that the Guthrie used to use that as an excuse, like, for some of their costumes, like that they'd have to have real, because our audience could tell the difference. It's like, well, fuck your audience. It's like, you can see the difference between real silk from like the sitting at the last row on the slope. I don't think so. I just think there's a way of, again, if you create some magic about what you're doing, and if the performance itself is vital enough, and if there's enough imagination at work, I don't feel, I've never got a sense that our audience feels cheated,
I think it's also, okay, this may be a huge generalization. Okay, it is a generalization. Not maybe is, it is. But I would think that when you go to the theater, anybody that goes to the theater is already practicing an element, of suspension of reality, right? Because they know that they're entering, even a very realistic play, you are still sitting in a darkened room watching people on a space do something, right? It's very, anything is theatrical in that sense. And so I think an audience would come to anything and be game for it. Like what Wendy said, but the audience that, whether they're in the front row at the Guthrie or the back of the slope, the difference of that silk curtain or the silk skirt or whatever the case may be, what is that actually lending to the story that actually helps the audience experience the story, quote unquote, deeper or better or whatever that, I feel like the storytelling and however you choose to do that storytelling is more important if I'm able to do it. Does it mean that we put something in the program that says, to use Wendy's 60%, do we put something in the program that says 60% or this set was created with 60% of recycled material or something like that? And so the audience is able to turn around and then ask, start to seek that out of their theaters and ask their theaters, how are you, because I don't mean to keep coming back to this, but when we've been talking about the safety and accountability standards, that's also, the audience is an element of that as well. The audience, we want audiences to know about those safety standards so that they ask for it. And I would think that more and more audience members would, I don't think we realize what those two dumpsters are out the backside of CTC or the Guthrie. We've seen them. We know they're there, but I don't know if an audience really knows about that kind of waste that does happen in our theater.
Right.
And so I think audience members would embrace it if theaters were to start doing it. And if that meant, I don't know what that would look like, they would go, oh, well, this is a theater, this theater is using more recycled products, so that's why the set doesn't look as fancy, or that's not real silk. I don't think that would be the case, because I think if that's what the audience is focused on, we haven't done our jobs as directors.
That's what I was going to say, Elaine, is like, if they're really looking at, is that real silk or not, then someone's not doing their job with what's happening on stage.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like, again, with a Frank audience, I don't feel that people ever feel shorted by this, it's like, because, we always have a nickel to build a set. So it's like, but I don't feel like people feel shorted by it because they're going to get something else out of it, And again, I don't feel like it should be viewed as a limitation at all. And I don't even really know. I mean, the audience may not even be aware that that's what's happening. I mean, you know what I mean? I wouldn't even feel the need to have to, I mean, unless it was about, just making it visible to an audience that, or raising the issue, the consciousness that is being recycled. But, they don't even need to know, because if you've got people doing their job, if they're, it doesn't have to make less of a production. It can make more of a production,
Yeah,
So,
this idea of like a certification is something that has come up
oh,
just kind of in conversation as well. I think of it more so with the example of like fair trade chocolate.
yeah, yeah, I see. Yeah.
It's more so like a positive kind of this has met this standard.
Right.
Now you are informed of it. And I say that to make it sound like it's very easy, but no, that like a good certification should be put in place because it helps people strive towards something and educate towards something.
Right. Right.
And I'd like to think just of like, as I've walked around the various farmers markets of Minneapolis over my lifetime, that I'd like to think that the majority of theater audiences, I think, are a crowd that are interested. And I just don't think that they've ever been put in a position to be educated enough to think that they want it, or think that there's a different option even. Because that I would be curious once that is put forward as like, you can have an apple or an orange. The apple means that it's both a piece of fruit, but if you do, this one, it means you're contributing to a circular economy that's having less impact while still getting, education or entertainment out of your theater. Or you can have this, which is still, tastes good, but maybe is still having a bigger carbon footprint. I think people will inherently start to make those different choices as they have with so many other different products that are now options out there.
I mean,
Right.
to think of like something that comes from like the administrative side, can we talk for a minute about the amount of paper that gets used for ask letters, whether it's middle of the year or the end of the year? I mean, my mailbox is already getting full of them. And I wish there was a way to opt in of do not send me paper communications. I would, because I'm also on your email list. I don't need.
We ask people that, Elena. We put that.
Do you? Well,
we've said it. If you prefer to, if you prefer only email, let us know that, and then we allow them to opt out of that.
Yeah, I mean, from my days with Prime, and as our mailing list grew, and I knew there were people, once we hit over, I don't know, 500 or something, and then you're thinking of the letter, the envelope, the donation envelope, the labels. I mean, you're just like, God, this is so much. I'm sitting here with 1,000 trees in my hand in the form of paper, and but it's this. That's how it's done. It's like, but this doesn't have to be how it's done.
Yeah.
Why do we have to use up so many trees just to ask for money? And maybe that's going to phase out as as the donor base, as like the 20 somethings now, when they're doing everything online, that's just going to become a moot point. But it's something I've noticed too. Just like we were talking about auditions and the amount of paper that is used at auditions. The flip side of that is those donation ask letters, which that's more of an administrative thing. But it's like I wish there were ways to opt out of those things. I didn't realize, Wendy, you were doing that, but that's awesome.
Wendy, did you have another thought, just kind of as we were kind of chatting about like this idea of like a certification or anything like that? Because I maybe thought I heard you would maybe start an idea, but if not, that's cool too. one question that I've asked in kind of all of my Green Theater conversations is if you could wave a magic wand and just make something appear that would make making green choices in theater easier, what would you conjure up with your magic wand so you could just make greener choices?
That's a hard one.
Some people would
Um,
like narrow in on like really specific things, and some people come up with like really broad ideas. I kind of love it.
I wish, as a director, I wish there was a technology that I could have my script all in digital format in a way that I could also take notes in it. I've yet to find something that actually works that way.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, that is one thing I still print out a script because I need the opposite page to for my, that's for my notes and my blocking and all that kind of stuff. And so that's one place where I wish the technology was advanced to a point that I could have it on I don't know, an iPad or an app that would allow that kind of in interaction with the script in a way that it was actually usable. Because right now I haven't found one that actually does everything I'd want it to do. That would be my magic wish for right now. I'd love to
That
have to stop printing out scripts, basically.
Yeah, that idea did come up in our stage manager conversation too. So I'm convinced that if stage managers are on it, we will find a solution to the problem.
We need a
um,
stage manager who's an IT person too.
yeah, we'll just pull that person together out of nowhere. So
Yeah.
yeah. But yes, that is a thing that has come up in other conversations too. So that's something um I know that as I'm talking with some of the other chapters of the Green Theater Alliance, I'm just going to see if, just across the nation, if there's some other technology that people are using that they're finding helpful. Cause I definitely want to circulate that to people because there's definitely an interest for that idea.
Yeah.
So,
And something that also could be that's not attached to scripts, but a way to, like, if you have people signing up for auditions where they can submit their headshot and resume, and I can use it in a way that I can pull it up during the audition. Again, so that I don't need a paper copy of a headshot. I don't need a paper copy of a resume, but I'm able to access it efficiently and make notes on it during an audition process.
mhm.
Because again, that is, I mean, I sat through multiple years of the generals at Park Square. And the first year was the year we had books. And I just got rid of my binders. I went through and I culled it down. And each book was like 3 inches thick.
Mhm.
And then they started moving to using the Minnesota playlist, which was great, but not everybody wanted to sustain their profile in the Minnesota playlist.
Mhm.
So then it became, so if I find somebody on there, it's not always necessary that I'll be able to track them down
Mhm.
again.
Mhm.
So I don't know if, again, that's a software or something that could be used by a theater company that when they sign people up, they fill out the information all digitally, and then we don't have to have papers at auditions.
Mhm.
Sorry, you guys, I had to step away to feed the dogs for a sec, but, do you know, who's that guy that does the audition? Elena, do you know him? What's it called? It's, let me see if I can find it. He does this thing where it's like, and it is all online, like the actors can upload their stuff and, I'm looking for the name of it. This guy just started up and it's actually really been, Theater Forms, it's called. You know that?
I have not seen that. Is it on Facebook or?
No, he's got a separate website. I can send you, I'll send you the link.
Okay.
Because we found that to be really handy, so.
Because getting stuff submitted and then putting that into like a Google Drive that's it's so clumsy that when you're actually sitting in the actual auditions, it's a hard way to, there's no way to take notes and all that kind of stuff. So that would be great if there's actually something like that that exists.
Yeah, yeah.
I was able to find this web link just from Googling it. And I'll be sure to post this on the Green Theater page too, so other people can kind of find it as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Wendy.
Yeah.
Wendy, do you have, if you were to wave your magic wand and just create a solution to a problem to make greener choices, do you have anything specific that comes to mind?
I mean, just the stuff off the top of my head, it's like what we were just saying earlier is that, it's the space issue. Yeah, and again, how do you communicate? Who's got what,
Mhm.
Just a second here. Cat, get out of the dog food dish. There we go. Okay. How do you, I mean, and you were saying that like creating a database, which is a great idea, but truthfully, I haven't thought that much about it. But I can think about it. So
Well,
More
if you-
money
if
for
you-
everybody. How about that? More money for everybody.
We'll just make it rain money.
Well,
Then it'll be green.
It's not even
So.
necessarily more money for it. It's just like, it's like, how can you have like how can you set up sort of a materials library for people so that they can go and check it out? We need this for, and Elena, I think I wanted to make sure to register your comment earlier about, the audience isn't aware of those dumpsters filled behind, I mean, that's totally true, and I think that idea of making them aware of that is a good campaign,
Mhm. Mhm.
So.
Great. Well, this has been a great conversation from my point of view. And I appreciate all the thoughts that you've generated at this point. I'm just curious if there's anything else specific that you wanted to maybe talk about or cover before we kind of wrap up our conversation for the evening.
Now I just poked in because I saw the thing on Facebook and I was like, oh, this sounds good. Oh, I should go to, and I was kind of running a little bit late and I was just, but I'm glad to hear. I'll Google now the Broadway, I'll Google, I'll do some Googling and learn a little bit more. So.
Yeah, right now our Minneapolis chapter is just a Facebook page because that's what I could bite off right now.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a very robust resources section on the Broadway Green Theater Alliance page that's got a lot of really good material in it.